35 millimeter or 50 millimeter? Which one is best? We're going to get into that today. Welcome to Free Will Photos. If you're new here, we're a photo editing channel that is designed to help beginner photographers learn how to navigate their creative vision through photo editing and then also creative gear and things of that sort. If that's something you're interested in, consider hitting the subscribe button and then hit that bell icon so you can be notified every time we release a new video. There's a battle where everyone says 35 millimeter is a primary lens that you need to get, or 50 millimeter is a primary lens, so much so that 50 millimeters has a nickname known as the Nifty 50. I have both in the DX version for the 35 millimeter lens. This works really well when we start talking about using this on a DX camera. This will not get you any real good mileage on a full frame camera. All right. But if you have a DX camera, a crop sensor, if you watch my previous video on lens for Nikon D3400, then you'll probably already have some insight on why I think the 35 millimeter is a great lens. But I'm going to cover some different options for the 35 millimeter today. And then the second lens that a lot of people are always talking about is the 50 millimeter, this thing, a 50 millimeter lens. This is a great lens. Look, I love this lens, and I was looking through my catalog and I found so many images that I photographed with this lens, and I just love the quality that I get straight out of camera with this lens. And I shoot RAW. I don't shoot JPEG. I do shoot RAW. But when I shoot JPEG, I really love the compressed shadows that I get when I use this lens. And I don't get that so much when I use this lens. So, and I believe the reason for that is this lens is a full frame lens. This is the 50 millimeter. This is a full frame lens. So it works on a 35 millimeter sensor as opposed to this one being a DX lens, the 35 millimeter. And this works for crop sensor cameras primarily. Now, I do put this onto my Nikon D610 from time to time, and that can be a fun thing because the Nikon D610, if you have one of those, it does dual aspect ratio. So I can change it to work on crop sensor lens, and I only use a portion of the viewfinder, which makes it a different type of challenge to compose the shot, because sometimes I forget that I'm using a DX lens and I don't look at the bounding box that I'm actually using. That's for another day. Anyway, bottom line, why should you care about either one of these lenses? We're going to start with the 35 millimeter and then we'll talk about the 50. The 35 millimeter is just, it's the average focal length that we see with our eye. You can get so creative with a 35 millimeter from taking extremely low shots. So if the subject is here and you're shooting up on the subject, you're going to get less distortion, or I mean, you'll get a level of distortion depending on how close or how far away you are from the subject. That can be part of the creative process for the image that you're looking for. The 35 millimeter is known as the storytelling lens. It's really good for editorial shots, street photography, capturing the moment as you're just hanging out. Maybe you're at a barbecue. I throw the 35 millimeter on because I want to see everyone who's there and get those candid moments as people are laughing and singing and dancing, kids running around, things like that. The 35 millimeter works great. And because it's a 35 millimeter focal length, my shutter speeds are usually going to be double that anyway. So I don't even have to worry because I normally keep my shutter speed at 1/100th of a second. So I'm already over the 2 times my focal length. So I'm going to get really sharp images by using this 35 millimeter lens. And I'm usually not cutting out too much light because this goes down to 1.8. So I have a lot of wiggle room. If I really needed to, I can take beautiful portraits with this. This lens is just great for those event situations where you're hanging out with family and you just want to capture something and live in the moment. This is one of those lenses where you can be in the moment. In fact, one of the creative shots that you can get with this lens, and I mean, essentially you can get with any of the lens, but this one works, in my opinion, the best, is point of view shots. That's where you're holding the camera as you're holding the hand of your kid or of your loved one, or you're reaching out to open up a door and you are holding the camera right in front over it. You snap the picture. That's a point of view shot. It just gives a different creative vibe to the overall image. Highly, highly recommend everyone pick up a 35mm lens at some point in their photography journey. Or if they're a professional, this is a great lens for any professional. Uh, some people are going to give me a lot of problem. They're going to say, but Chris, that's a DX lens. I get it. It is. But this DX lens works phenomenal, especially on my DX cameras. Now, on my D610, yes, sometimes I miss the shot because I am not paying attention to what I'm composing when I snap with this. But on my D5200 and when I use this on my D3400, if I'm just walking around and I want something small and easy to carry, this lens works phenomenal for those situations. Highly recommend the 35mm DX to anyone who's using a crop sensor camera for sure. And if you're using a D610 or something that can change the aspect ratio to a crop sensor ratio, then absolutely you should probably pick one up too, because this, I think I paid $150 for this lens. If you want to pick one of these up, check out the affiliate links in the description box below. Now, on to my absolute favorite lens of all time, the 50mm 1.8G. I bought this lens. This was my, I guess, third lens, second lens, however you want to look at it. I got the 18-55, the 70-300 inside of my package when I purchased my first camera. And then after I learned how to use that, this was the very next lens that I picked up. And I have not put this thing down. No matter where I go, if I shoot Canon now for a lot of my work, but whenever I'm walking around with my Nikon, this is always in the bag, no matter what. This lens goes with me everywhere. I can't say the same about my 35. The reason why I love this lens so much is because it's a full frame lens, one, so it works great on my D610. But when I put this onto my D3400 or my D5200, this becomes a 75mm-ish lens because of the 1.5 times crop. Okay, so I'm getting a lot more mileage out of this, and I love like when I shoot portraits with this, with that 75 or with the D5200, I'm just close enough to the subject that I feel like we're able to have a conversation while I'm photographing them, as opposed to if I had an 85mm lens and I had to stay super far back just to capture my subject the way that I want to capture them. This lens works great in those situations. But when I have this on my D610, I'm right there with the person that I'm photographing because I do a lot of tight crop shots with this lens. I don't get full body with the 50mm. I don't really, that's not my style. Sometimes I go 3/4, but I usually just go headshot and maybe get in a little bit over the shoulder. I usually stop right before the belly button on most of my images. That's just my personal style, and everyone who I work with, the clients, my family, they seem to like that, so I keep it up. But why do you need a 50mm lens? This is just a very standard focal length. When you put this onto a full frame camera, this is what the camera, like if you got one of those point and shoot cameras back in the day, the little windy shoot, or not point and shoot, what is it? Like the Kodak disposable camera. That's what I was thinking of, disposable camera. This is essentially between the 35 and the 50. This is what the look you would get out of those cameras. So there's a level of nostalgia to the 50 millimeter. This is also really good for detail shots. This lens lets me get pretty close to things, and it's not a macro lens, but I can get really close to my subject, or I can get close to a wall, and I can really control my creative vision with this lens. That's why I think everyone should have one. Now, before I wrap up this video, I want to hear about you guys. I want to hear what you think. 35 millimeter should be, do you recommend 35 millimeter as the next lens for an individual, or should they get a 50 millimeter lens as their next lens after they've already mastered the kit lens? Or should they just pick up a 35 millimeter or a 50 millimeter lens when they buy their first camera and just go out and photograph with those? The challenges with these, they are prime lens, so you have to move. You know, you don't get to walk around. Or I'm sorry, you do get to walk around. You don't get to stay in one spot and zoom like you do with the 18 to 55 or the 70 to 300, which is really convenient, especially as you're starting to learn the camera. But once you've learned your camera settings and you can adjust them on the fly using aperture priority mode or shutter speed priority mode, you know, even in manual mode, if you're very familiar, like I can dial in settings on this D5200 without even looking. I know which buttons I'm pressing and where my fingers are going. And most of that is because there's only one dial, so I know that if I want to expose or change my aperture, I press down on the exposure compensation button, and then I just move that left and right if I'm in manual mode, and then I have the function key over it. I'm not going to get into that. Look, there are benefits to both lens. I love both of them. I still use to this day both of the lens. I just want to hear what you guys think. So there you go. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.